Today's stuff we're going to learn is Yevamot Gimel. There's no pictures for today. You'll see for the next few pages we don't have. We're going to get off a little into other things. As I promised throughout the Masechet, when we need them, we will have pictures and characters that move and we can see all the connections. Okay, today's daf is sponsored by Tina Lam with gratitude to Hashem for a new granddaughter, Dalia Hadran. Mazal tov to her parents, Bracha and Akiva Berger. Today's daf is sponsored by Sylvia Simmons in loving memory of her father, Avram Simmons, Avram Nachum ben Yisrael, and his yurtzeit. Brand plucked from fire, Ud Mutzal Me'esh, survivor of Kavno Ghetto. He planted the seeds for my studies with the Hadran community of Talmud learners. Today's daf is sponsored by Susan Chapsels. I would like to dedicate my learning today to the success of the Hampton Synagogue's brilliant Rabbi Mark Schneier in his tireless efforts on behalf of interreligious and ethnic understanding between Muslims and Jews, as evidenced by his brokering the meeting between Turkey's President Erdogan and Israel's President Herzog. And today's daf is sponsored anonymously, Zayin Adar, in memory of Moshe ben Amram, Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf. So again, we had the Mishnah where we had 15 cases. I'll just give the basics of a woman who has a husband. The husband dies. He has two wives. One of the women happens to be related in a way, a forbidden relationship to the brother. It has to be in a way that they're not equally related, right? In other words, just she's related to the brother for some reason. Then she becomes forbidden to do yibum with him, which means she's exempt from yibum. And then it makes the tzara, the second wife, also exempt. And then if there was a third brother that nobody was forbidden to, and the second wife married, the third brother did yibum with him, and then that brother died and he had another wife and they all fell to yibum, right, to the original one that the first one was forbidden to, they all become exempt. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to start with a bunch of questions on the structure of the Mishnah, on the wording of the Mishnah, etc. So the Gemara starts off in Bet Amud, right, 6 lines from the bottom where the Gemara starts. Michti kulu me'achot isha yafina. Well, the other thing I have to tell you before we start is today you're going to have to be very patient. Patient in what sense? Yesterday was patience in terms of understanding all the different relationships, which was a little bit complicated. Today, there's going to be references to many other sugyot that are going to come up in the course of the next 10 pages. And we're not going to fully understand them today because if I taught them all to you today, that would basically be like teaching you another 5 dapim. So we don't have time to do that. So you're going to have to understand that by the end of today, you won't understand everything mentioned in today's daf, but as we go on other pages, you'll get some of the details. We'll understand the structure and what they do with everything, but you won't necessarily understand fully all the content discussed. So here's a good example of something that we're actually going to get to now. We're not going to yet understand it. By the end of today, you will, because the Gemara is going to talk about it later. So michti kulu me'achot isha yafina. All these laws, the Gemara tells you as if you know, that we're going to see this soon. All the laws that we're discussing right now in the Mishnah of that if you fall to yibum to someone who's erva, you can't marry him. And then your sarah, the rival wife doesn't, or the co-wife, and her tzara of her, right? The co-wife of hers also. All those laws are learned out from one case in the list of arayot. Okay, just so you know, arayot are all these forbidden relationships. They're all mentioned in chapter 18 of Vayikra, and then in chapter 20 of Vayikra, it mentions what punishments you get. So all of these are learned out from one verse, the whole basis, the laws, right? Not the 15 cases, the concept that the woman, her tzara, all of them are exempt from yibum. In the case of erva, are all learned out from achot isha. That drasha we're going to see later in today's stuff. If that's the case, what would be the obvious case to start with if it all derives from there? Litnei achot isha bereisha. The whole issue now is the order of the Mishnah. All the cases should be learned out from that case in the Mishnah, if that's the case, right? It would make the most sense. That's the main case. Then we want to learn all our cases from there. So to which the Gemara says, wait a minute. B'chi tema, here's our first answer. We're going to have 3 answers to this question. The first answer is b'chi tema, and we're going to reject the first 2. Chumrei nakad. Well, there's different levels of severity of the arayot. So maybe it's an order of severity. Now, normally when we talk about severity, so first of all, it's a little bit confusing because there's a mix in the arayot of mito beitin, which is the beitin the court administrates the punishment, which are usually skila, sreifa, hereg, and chenek, right? So stoning, strangling, killing with a sword, and actually, sorry, I said it wrong. Skila, stoning, sreifa, burning, hereg with a sword, and chenek strangling. So now they say, and that's generally the order of severity. But there's a debate in Sanhedrin. What's the order of severity? Some people say that sreifa is more chamor. That's Rabbi Shimon, who holds that burning is more stringent than stoning. So if we say it goes in order, so some of them are burning, some of them are stoning, one of them, okay, and the rest are karet, which is administered by God. Okay, so we're going to assume right now that skila and sreifa are the more strict of the two. But which one? Well, if we say it goes in order of severity, now we started with Bito, his daughter. Rabbi Shimon, you could say, maybe it's Rabbi Shimon, Damar, sreifa chamura. Sreifa is the most severe. And okay, that's Rabbi Shimon. Again, it's not the way we hold, but maybe the Mishnah goes by Rabbi Shimon. And then we're going to say like this, sreifa is the most stringent, and that's why Bito comes first. However, again, something we're going to learn in a few minutes, which is the fact that you get sreifa by Bito doesn't appear in the verse. It appears by chamoto, your mother-in-law. A man sleeps with his mother-in-law, he gets sreifa. From there, we learn to Bito. So they say, well, if you're going to go by an order of stringency, then which one are you going to go with first? The main base pasuk, which is chamoto should be first, because that's where it actually says in the Torah you get burned, rather than the one we learned out by a drasha. So therefore, they say, if that's the case, because the main case of sreifa is listed there, and it's learned from there to everywhere else. Ve'od, and a further question on this, which basically we're going to reject then, batar chamoto line kalato, to batar sreifa skila chamura. If you're going to go by order of stringency, well, kalato, the daughter-in-law is skila. So if the daughter-in-law is skila, and that's the next in line, according to Rabbi Shimon, that should be the next in line in the Mishnah. Where does kalato appear in the Mishnah? Last. So that doesn't make any sense. So rejection of that option. Ella, option number 2, bito, kevan da'atya midrasha chavivale. Well, the whole forbidden, the fact that your daughter's forbidden, and actually we're going to now learn, Rashi said it then, I didn't talk about it when we learned the Mishnah, that when they say bito, they actually mean bito me'anusato, which we learned already in Chagiga, which is a daughter from a situation of rape, not a daughter from his wife, but a daughter from a situation of rape. Now, whether bito in the Mishnah refers exclusively to this case or additionally to this case, it doesn't really make such a difference. But the point is that bito is included. So if, let's say, your daughter through rape falls to you for yibum, you're not allowed to, right? That's the case of bito. So now they say, well, that's all learned out from a drasha. You might remember this to those who learn Chagiga. We learned this in Chagiga. It doesn't ever say in the Torah your daughter from a rape is forbidden to you, but it's learned out by a drasha. So now we're going to learn that in a minute. But the logic is like this. And this is an opposite logic, right? If you were organizing a list, you would put Torah prohibition, right? And then things learned out by a drasha of the rabbis. Well, the rabbis like the drasha the most. Why? It's actually a great line. Because it's ati midrasha chavivale, the rabbis love things that they learn out by drasha, because that's human interaction in Torah learning, right? It's the way we get to be creative and learn things. So that's actually even better than things that are learned out. And that's why bito starts out. That's option number 2. We're going to eventually reject this, but right now they're suggesting that maybe that's the reason. Well, then they say, if they love things that are learned out by drasha, well, what did we say before? All the laws in the Mishnah are learned out by drasha, because they're all learned except for achot ishto. Remember, that was the one case, it was the paradigm for all of them. But kulunami midrasha atu. So now they say, wait, you're mixing apples and oranges. Nihidal in yibum atu midrasha. All the laws of yibum, and that when there's an erva, you can't do yibum, and then your tzara can't, and your tzara, it's true. Those are all learned out from drasha, other than achot ishto. But ikar isurayu behediktib behu. But the actual fact that this is Isur Ayot, like his, whatever case in the Mishnah, all those cases are all learned out directly in the Torah that they're erva, that they're forbidden relationships. But bito ikari surami drasha, but one's daughter is actually really, again, a daughter from a rape is actually learned out only from a drasha. And that's why bito would be first. So we're still on this answer. To which, and how do we know this? Now we're finally going to be told, okay, this is, again, the way the Gemara works. They kind of assume you know everything that's beyond us. So now they're going to get back to this. How do you know bito is learned from drasha? And again, this is a repeat of a sugya we learned in Chagiga, and it comes up a lot in Shas, this case. Da'amar Rava Amar li Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Rava said, Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi told me, Atya hena hena, Atya zima zima. Okay, You're supposed to know what all that means. Since I assume you don't necessarily know what it all means, I brought it on the sheet, the psukim. Okay, so in Vayikra, chapter 18, pasuk 17, it says, Ervat isha ubita, the erva of a woman and her daughter. You can't marry, you can't, have relations with a woman and her daughter. Lo tigale et bat bina, et bat bita, lo tikach legalot ervata. You also can't sleep with her, right, your grandchild, through, it's basically your wife and her daughter or her granddaughter. Okay, that's your daughter, because whether it's your wife's daughter or your own daughter, right, obviously if you're married and it's your daughter through marriage, it's going to be forbidden. So that's explicit. Then it says at the end of that pasuk, she'era heina zimahi. So we're going to darshan the heina there and the zima from a gzera shava. When we compare two words and say we're going to learn one from the other. In Vayikra pasuk yud chet, pasuk yud, it says something very, very similar. Ervat bat bincha o bat bitcha. Okay, there's two things missing here that were in the first one. This is your granddaughter from your son and your granddaughter from your daughter. It doesn't say your daughter, and it doesn't say your wife's children. It says your granddaughter, as if there's no wife in this pasuk. You can see where they're going to get to that it was rape, because look, there's no wife mentioned. And also the fact that it's a granddaughter, they assume, well, kal v'chomer, right? If your granddaughter, then obviously your daughter as well. So that's a pasuk, and then it says lo tegale ervatan, can't have relations with them. Ki ervatcha heina. The word heina appears there. From there, they learn from heina to heina, because that's also daughter in the previous pasuk. This also includes daughter, and because it doesn't say wife, they're going to assume it means from rape. Now, what's the zima zima? Well, that's where we learn, and again, this is going to teach us something we saw before, which is, how do you know you get sreifa, you get burned? Because in the pasuk, Vayikra, chapter 20, pasuk 14, it says, Isha sheyikachet yisha ve'et ima. This is a woman and her mother. Zima hi ba'esh yisrofu, right? This is your mother-in-law. You have to be burned by fire. Oto ve'etein lo tieh zima b'tochachen. So zima appears twice in that pasuk. It doesn't really matter. Once it appears once, you can do gzera shava from there to the zima of the previous one, right? Of the isha ubita. And from there, you learn the heina to the other case. So all those three cases, you get straight. So anyway, what was the point of this? The point of this was bitome anusato, your daughter from rape is forbidden by a drasha. And that's why that should come first. But now they say, well, if that's what you want to say, and we now have, let's just put into three categories. We have bito is the most drasha oriented, because even the erva itself is learned by drasha. All the other cases other than achot isha, okay, which is, again, your husband is married to your brother's married to your sister, and he wants to marry now. Okay, forget your brother. Let's forget yibum. Just in general, achot isha means a man is married to a woman. He can't marry her sister. The best way to understand this case is Yaakov married two sisters, right? Forbidden. Now, how did he do it? Okay, that's a whole separate question. There's answers given. It was before Matan Torah. He wasn't in Israel. There are all sorts of answers given, but not that you could do it outside of Israel anyway. But there's answers they try to give, but that's the basic case of the erva that we're discussing. That's where they learn all these laws of tzarat, tzarat, tzarat. We'll get to that later today. But all the other cases in the Mishnah were derived from there. So if our theory is we go from drasha, whatever was learned by drasha is ikar, so bito should be first. All the other cases other than achot ishto, am I saying? Yeah, achot isha, achot isha. Other than, right, the sister of his wife, all those other cases should come first, and that should be the very last case, because that's the one that's said explicitly. So that's what the Gemara is going to ask now. That should be the very last one, because that's the one that appears actually in the verse. So now they say, okay, so this isn't, right? So now they say, they give like a half answer. They said, look, because earlier in the Mishnah, they started mentioning siblings. So they mentioned that case earlier. Okay, kind of got there by accident. So the Gemara says, but really, if you really care and you want to look at the Mishnah as a whole and say, well, it was organized in a particular way, then what should you have done? Elatani korve nak. Okay, we're assuming now, and we're going to see this in a minute, that the Mishnah goes by categories, right? So one of the categories is siblings, anything having to do with a sibling. Sibling of your mother, your sibling from your mother, sibling, right? All those siblings. If that's a unit, and we want to get a achot isha at the end, well, put that unit at the end. In other words, it's very easy. There was an easy way to resolve that. So because of that, they say clearly this drasha answer doesn't fly, and they throw it out. So now, third answer. Okay, again. So, and if you look at the sheet, it's very easy to see this, right? The first answer was it goes by chumrah, by severity of the punishment. We rejected that because kala is last, right? That didn't make sense. And also we said it should be chamoto first. The net, because that's the main halacha of the streifa. Then we suggested maybe it's whatever's learned by drasha. Third answer. There's actually a logic to the categories in the Mishnah. We're going to have groups. Okay, you noticed yesterday there were groups. In fact, I skipped a few because it was basically an outgrowth of the other one. So they now say, elatane korve naki. What they did was first, they took the most closest relative to a person. Okay, because some of these are more distant relatives, right? They're forbidden to you, but they're more distant. So it starts with your own, right? What's the closest to a man? His daughter. Okay, Tana Bito. And then once you're at Bito, what goes with Bito? Bat Bito ubat bino, right? So your daughter and anyone who comes from your daughter, her children. De Krove Atzmo, because they're related through him directly. They're his blood relatives. What comes after that? Well, I did Tana Shlosha Dorot Limata Dide, Tane Nami Shlosha Dorot Limata Dida. Since it then said, right, him and the 3 generations below, it's 2 generations, but it means basically getting to the 3rd generation. Then it teaches his wife's relatives, because the closest to him is his wife, and his wife's relatives, even though they're not blood related, they're also forbidden to him. So then they do hers, right? That's the next group. Bat Ishto, Bat Bina, and Bat Bita, right? His wife's daughter, her granddaughters, right, from a different marriage, and her granddaughters from her son, her granddaughters from her daughter. After that, so then they go, okay, well, 3 generations up from her, right? Then we have his mother-in-law, his mother-in-law's mother, his father-in-law's mother. That's going up, right? After they went down, they went up. Then we start going sideways. Tana achoto, okay, his sister. Now we get to all the siblings, right? We said there was a whole group of siblings. So what's that? Achoto, his sister, and achotimo. Well, those are of the siblings, those are the most close to him because it's his mother's sister and his own sister. Once we're already in Isurei Achva, Tana Achotishto, they don't actually say, but it's not just Achotishto, but Eshet Achiv Meimo, right? His brother on his mother's side, his maternal brother's sister. And then what are we left with? Okay, at this point, we're almost done with the Mishnah. We have 2 more cases. We have the brother who wasn't yet born when he died, remember? Now, where did we learn that from? We learned that this doesn't have to do with relatives anymore. I mean, it's his brother, but why is it forbidden to her to do Yibum? Because Ki yeshvu achim yachdav. Remember, it said when they sit together, which means he had to be alive at the time. That has nothing to do with a relationship. That's something totally different. So the Gemara says, and the last case is Kalato, his daughter-in-law. So the Gemara says, Bidinhu, logically, it really delictime lekalato makami esh tachiv shelo haya ba'olamo. Dilo mishum korbahu dasire. Okay, that's not forbidden because of a relationship. So really, Kalato should have been next. Why did the brother then come in there? You can probably figure this out on your own. It really should have been last because it's a totally different category than all the others. Because it has nothing to do with the relationship. It has to do with that he wasn't alive, and there's a drasha about that. So, but they were in the brother thing, the sibling. It was the whole sibling category, so you may as well just stick it in the sibling category and then end with kalato. Okay. So that explained the order of our Mishnah in a very logical group, right? He grouped it well. What I recommend is to go back to yesterday, look through the pictures, and you can see the groupings much more clearly. Next, they're going to have, that was question on the order of the Mishnah. Now we have questions on the language of the Mishnah. My area detane potot, litne osrot. This was something I brought up yesterday, which is it says they're exempt, but not only are they exempt, they're forbidden. And it comes from the whole issue that it's forbidden to do Yibum because he's Erva to one, and then he becomes basically Erva by relate, right? Because the Tzara, it's not really Erva, but it becomes forbidden. She can't do Yibum. So why doesn't it say forbidden? Why does it say exempt? Itana osrot. So we're going to have 2 answers to this question. If you said osrot, hava amina asur liyaben. Aval michlatz chalza. If we had said you can't do Yibum, you would have thought, okay, you can't do Yibum because you can't marry. But there's an alternative to Yibum. What's the alternative to Yibum? Chalitza. So if she can't marry him, they do the ceremony of Chalitza. And what this is telling you is you're exempt. You don't even have to do Chalitza, right? Normally, if a woman doesn't do Yibum, right, nowadays, nobody does Yibum. And you'll even see later today that even in those days, people believed you really shouldn't do Yibum, by the way, which is just interesting in and of itself. And that the chalitza was preferred, which makes sense because I told you they weren't into the whole 2 wives thing, okay? It wasn't a big thing in the time of the Mishnah and Gemara. So anyway, they say here, you would have thought maybe you have to do chalitza. So that's why it says potrot, exempt. You don't have to do anything, right? So that's why kamash malan comes to teach you that. To which they question, they say, well, if that's the case, v'litni asura lachlotz. Why didn't it just say then you're forbidden to do chalitza? And then we know you can't do chalitza. You obviously can't do yibum. To which the Gemara asks, my kavid, wait, whoever said there's such a thing as forbidden to do chalitza? I understand forbidden to do yibum because maybe you're not allowed to have relations with this person, but forbidden to do chalitza? So the Gemara says, what's wrong with saying it's forbidden to do chalitza? Of course it is. Alam alo, why do you have an issue with that? If we allow you to do chalitza, people might think that you could also do yibum. So yeah, we're going to forbid chalitza so that you don't come to think that you could actually do yibum. So that's answer number 1. That we said osrot. If we had said osrot, you would have thought you have to do chalitza. That's why it says potro. But the second answer is kevan de b'makom mitzvah hu da asirat tzara v'shelo b'makom mitzvah sharia. One second, I just want to check out something. Oh, sorry. We rejected that answer because it says it should have then said asura lachlotz, and we would have known if asura lachlotz, then you can't do yibum. So that's not a good answer. So now they give a second answer. They say kevan de b'makom mitzvah hu da asirat tzara v'shelo b'makom mitzvah sharia. Now, what does this mean? This is a little bit complicated. The tzara is forbidden. If I fall to yibum to someone who's my father, let's say, right? We saw that case. I married my father's brother, my uncle. Okay, simple case. I married my uncle from my father's side. I fall to yibum to my father. I can't do yibum, right? And then in that case, my tzara is forbidden, okay? But let's say I married someone else entirely. I didn't marry my uncle. I married whoever I married, right? I married my husband. He dies. And he had another wife, okay? Let's go back to our wives, okay? He had a wife named Shula, okay? Shula was the tzara. If he dies and Shula wants to marry my father, she can do that, right? She only can't marry my father when there's yibum, and I'm supposed to fall to yibum to my father. But if she wants to marry my father when her husband dies and our shared husband dies, she no longer has any connection to me, right? There's no issue. Nobody says, oh, she can't marry my father. She has no connection to me anymore, right? Our husband died, whatever. It's only when there's yibum that this law is applicable. So that's what this is saying. I'm going back to the beginning. When there's yibum, a mitzvah upon you, yibum, that's when the tzara can't marry anyone who's a forbidden relationship to me. If it's the yabam, but shelo b'makom mitzvah sharia. But if it was just a random husband who died and now she wants to coincidentally marry my relative, it's no problem. Mishum hachi tane potrot. That's why it says exempt. Because if we said forbidden, what might you have thought? You might have thought she's always forbidden to marry my relatives. Okay? Even if there's no yibum. So that's why it says exempt. So that we know it's exempt from yibum and not having to do with any sort of, it's not that she has any erva with my relatives just because we happen to be married to the same husband at some point. So now they say, okay, fine. We'll accept that. But now we have another question. Umay area detane mina chalitza mina yibum. Now it says later on in the Mishnah, it's their pturot from chalitza and from yibum. Litnei mina yibum l'chude. It just could have said they're exempt from yibum, and we would have understood from there also chalitza. So they say, well, not necessarily. Itana mina yibum hava mina mechatchalze, like we said before. Yibum elo miyaba. You might have thought if it said exempt from yibum, maybe they don't do yibum, but they still have to do chalitza. Kamash malan, that the fact that it says mina chalitza mina yibum teaches you what? Kol ha'oleh liyibum oleh lechalitza, v'kol she'eno oleh liyibum eno oleh lechalitza. Teaches you anyone who doesn't do yibum doesn't have to do chalitza, and anyone who doesn't do chalitza doesn't do yibum. Okay? Or that's actually no. It's whoever does do yibum can do chalitza. Whoever doesn't can't do yibum can't do chalitza. To which the Gemara is going to have a very good question. Then, if that's what they wanted to teach you, what should it have said? Not from chalitza and from yibum. It should have said from yibum and from chalitza, right? V'litnei mina yibum umina chalitza. Inami, alternatively, it could have just said mina chalitza lechude. It could have just said chalitza, and it would have been obvious. If you don't do chalitza, well, obviously you don't do yibum, because if you don't do the undoing, right, then you don't do the doing. So Abba Shaul, they said this must be according to Abba Shaul, who's a Tana. And I wanted to point this out. He's even an early Tana. And he says, Ta'amar mitzvah chalitza kodemet mitzvah ibum. Okay, as much as this is the Masechet of Yevamot, this is a very big line. He basically prefers chalitza. Okay, I don't think they like this whole idea of taking second wives. And certainly he didn't. And he said, you're better off doing chalitza than yibum. Okay, even though, right, it's all about passing on the legacy. But in the end, practically speaking, chalitza is just preferable, he says. And that's why they put chalitza first, because that was the preferred method. Okay, now that's his approach. Not everybody agrees, but it is his approach. And I think it's really interesting to know. I just want to point out a side thing. Again, I don't want to confuse you too much, but I know we're going to get to it and you're going to say, but didn't we say anything? So I know you guys always catch me on those things. It says here, when there's yibum, there's no chalitza. Okay, when you're putting from yibum. We're going to see, and we already talked about it yesterday, that there are some cases where you don't do yibum, you do chalitza. But that's not, this is talking on a Torah level. If you're exempt from the Torah from yibum, you're exempt from chalitza. However, there are certain cases where the rabbis instituted, right? There was this in between where something was rabbinic. So on a Torah level, you have to do yibum. On a rabbinic level, we view it as a rayot or some other issue. So we're going to make you do chalitza to kind of just cover your bases. That's something different. This is talking about from the main law. If there's really no Torah law of yibum, then there's no chalitza. Now the Gemara. So basically what we dealt with until now, just to review, because I want to make sure the daf is clear to everyone. We started with why the order in the Mishnah. We gave three answers. The first two were rejected. We got the third one. We asked, why does it say potrot, right? We had two answers. One was rejected. We kept the second one, which was, right, to teach you that it's bimkom mitzvah, but not when it's not bimkom mitzvah. Then we said, why does it say mina chalitza mina yibum? And we said it's to teach you both that they go together, and it's to teach you that chalitza is ideal. Minyana dereisha lemiutemai. Another question on the Mishnah. The Mishnah starts off with 15 women. Now, Mishnayot in general like numbers, right? Arbavot nizikin. There's 4 main categories of damages. There's a lot of them. But sometimes the Mishnah likes to ask, why are you saying there's 15, right? 15 means there's not 16, there's not 17, right? That's the idea. And minyana, that's minyana dereisha. What's it coming to exclude? The minyana in the beginning, okay? The counting in the beginning. Minyana deseifa lemiutemai. The Mishnah repeats. Now, it doesn't exactly repeat. It doesn't say 15 later on in the Mishnah. You can go check. But it does say hare elu, these specifically, okay? Potrot tzarotehen, tzarot tzarotehen, and all that. So why does it have to be specific again, as if just these and not any others? So the answer, limiute deravu derav asi. Okay, this is another thing that we're going to just touch on the surface, and we're going to get to them in a few more dapim. So and they don't even tell you what they said, okay? But it's to exclude the two cases that Rav said one case and Rav Asi said a different case, that these cases are exactly, have the same laws as in our Mishnah. And our Mishnah didn't hold that way. It's to exclude what? The tzara v'sota. Okay, that's what Rav said. The tzara v'sota, if a sota stays married to her husband, which she's not allowed to, she cheats on her husband and she stays married to him, she's not allowed to, she can't have a relationship with her husband. If he were to die without children, so her tzara, according to Rav, would have all the same laws as the tzarot in our Mishnah. Now here it's different because it's not like she's a forbidden relation to the brother, right? But because she wasn't really allowed to be married to him, that excludes, that's why there's a whole machloket about this. Okay, we'll get to why Rav holds that it's the case, but that's the case that our Mishnah is saying, no, we don't think that tzara is exempt in that case. We think that tzara is not, okay? Next, the Rav Asi said that tzara an ailonit. An ailonit is someone who has fertility issues, right? Particular fertility issues. She basically can't have children. So she doesn't do yibum because there's no point, right? The whole idea is for her to have children with the husband. So again, what's the status of her tzara? If she can't do yibum, is her tzara exempt? Now it's right. Both of these are not exactly erva because it's not like the sota is forbidden to the brother, right? But the fact is she wasn't really supposed to be married to him, so there's no yibum involved. So they're both exceptions to the rule from our Mishnah, but Rav and Rav Asi think they're not. So basically, Rav and Rav Asi view them exactly as our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is telling you these and no others, meaning not those two. So now we have an issue. Well, Rav Asi l'mutemai. So how did they read our Mishnah? They have these 15 and not others. First, we're going to have to say, well, who do they exclude? And we need 2 because there's the beginning and the end. And then the question is going to be, well, why aren't they mentioned in the Mishnah if they have the same laws as the Mishnah according to Rav and Rav Asi? And now we're going to have two possibilities with the Rav and Rav Asi. Either they each agree with each other, or they each disagree with each other, and each one has one exclusion, right? If they agree with each other, then together they have two exclusions. And then we have to find two new exclusions. So isfira lehu dahadade, if they agree with each other, then we need two new ones. So what are we going to exclude according to them? We learned about miyun yesterday. If a woman is younger than under 12 and two pubic hairs, and her brother or her mother marry her because the father's dead, and it's only derabana marriage, right? She can do miyun. So now we have a case where she does miyun to the yabam. Her husband dies. She hadn't done miyun yet, but she's still of the age where she could do it. She didn't get too old where she can't. And she just says, I don't want to be married to this yabam. Okay, because even though she's not married to him yet, but she can do it to this. Okay, we're going to learn this word soon. It's called zika. She is connected to him until she does yibum, basically. So she wants to cut that connection. She severs the connection by doing miyun. Her tzara does not have this exemption anymore because she kind of leaves the picture. Okay, again, we'll get into that more in detail another time. Okay, this is another interesting case. A man who's married to a woman, they get divorced, she marries someone else, and then she gets divorced or he dies, and then they want to get remarried. They're not allowed to by Torah law. If he does anyway, he remarries her, then they're not, right? It's a problematic marriage. In that case, there's no laws of yibum. But her tzara, if he has another wife, she would have to do yibum. So that's the exemption that they're talking about here. If each one has only one exception, then each one holds the exemption of the friend. And then the second exemption will be okay, and then we put in one, right? Each one has the other one, and we add one of the other two that we just added. Well, so now they have a question. Well, then why don't they talk about this case in the Mishnah? So they say, there's no case of tzarat in those cases of the sota and the ilomit. Okay, why? Because again, both of them are not actually, once the tzara can do, one second, let me just get this straight, because I actually got confused by this for a minute. Right, both of them. Right. These have nothing to do with relationships to what's tzarat. Tzarat means if there's a third brother who they can marry, right? Then remember if Shula marries the third brother, does yibum with him, in these cases, the third brother's in the exact same, the sota is an issue for all of them equally. There's no such thing as a third brother that's different to her, or the iloni can't marry the third brother just like she can't marry the second brother. So there's no case of tzarat tzara. Tzarat tzara is a case where there has to be potential even for the first wife to marry the third brother. None of these cases, she can't marry any of them because it doesn't have to do with her relationship to brother two specifically, it has to do with her relationship to her husband, which prohibits her from marrying any of his brothers. So there is no case of tzarat tzara. That's why they're not in the Mishnah, because the Mishnah had to have cases where we had all of the possibilities. So again, this is only according to Rav and Rav Asi. Everyone else agrees that there is no such thing at all. Okay, next. Now we finally get to where we started. Where do we get all these laws from the Mishnah? Okay, where do we learn all these laws from Achot Isha? Okay, now again, I want to preface this by saying the whole fulfillment of the mitzvah of Yibum is arayot in and of itself. Because remember, two brothers can't marry the same woman, okay? Even if someone's brother dies, he's not allowed to marry his brother's wife. Only in the case where he didn't have children and the importance of the mitzvah of the Yibum do we allow it. It's very important to understand as a basic here. If you get that, then you'll understand. So there's Isur Arayot no matter what in Yevamot, okay? It's just that we're overriding it because of the mitzvah of Yibum. Okay, we're going to talk, the end of the daf, we're going to talk about ate ase v'dacha lo taseh. The mitzvah ase can sometimes override a mitzvah lo taseh. So the Gemara here says, so then if that's the case, theoretically, think about it. All these cases of arayot, you should be allowed to do because it's the mitzvah of Yibum, right? So who cares that she has an Isur Erva? All Yibum is Isur Erva. So why don't we override it in all these cases? So that we're going to learn from this drasha. Tanu Rabbanan. Isha elachota lo tikach litzror legalot ervata alea bechaya. Okay, what does this mean? A woman and her sister. Okay, you can't marry a woman and her sister, like we said, Yaakov, Rachel, and Leah, obvious case. Okay, you can't do that. Litzror means as a second wife. Ligalot ervata aleha bechayeha. Now, notice it says in her lifetime. Remember, I told you yesterday that if Leah were to die, Yaakov could marry Rachel. Okay? So, but when she's alive, he can't. Now, there's one word in this pasuk that is totally unnecessary. What word is that? Aleha. Lo tikach legalot ervata, on her when she's alive. Why on her? Lo tikach legalot ervata bechayeha. It already said ervata, her erva. Right? It's basically like saying you're doing something inappropriate to your wife by having relations with her sister. So what's this word aleha coming to teach us? Ma Talmud lomar. So now they notice that in Yibum it says aleha. Lefi shene'emar Yevamot yavo aleha, because it says the Yavam. Now the mitzvah of Yibum, by the way, we'll get to this, but the marriage of Yibum is consummated specifically by relations, okay, sexual relations, because that's the Yevamot yavo aleha, because the whole point is to have children, okay, as opposed to marriage, which can be done in different ways, okay, which we'll get to in Kiddushin, but a Yibum is specifically consummated by sexual relations. So it says Yevamot yavo aleha, that's where you see it in the verse. Shomea ani afilu ba'achat mikol harayot hamurot b'torah katuv medaber, right? Maybe it means Yevamot yavo aleha at all costs, even if it's a forbidden relationship. But they say like this: Zerashav ne'amar kan aleha v'ne'amar lahalan aleha. It says aleha in both cases, meaning by her and by Yibum. Ma lahalan b'mkom mitzvah, since the aleha in Yibum is when there's a mitzvah, because Yibum is a mitzvah. Av kan b'mkom mitzvah. The pasuk yishal achota lo tikach, don't marry. Litzror legadot ervata aleha is also when there's a mitzvah of Yibum, and Amar Rachmana lo tikach. And it says, despite the fact that there's a mitzvah, you can't do it. Okay, that's the main drasha where we learn that a woman can't have relations with the Yabam, can't do the mitzvah of Yibum, and then therefore is exempt from Yibum. If it's, let's say, right, her sister is married to the brother. Okay, that's the basic law we're learning here. Now, that's case one. That's she is exempt from Yibum from the erva. What about her tzara? En li elahi tzara taminayin. What about her second wife, the co-wife? Talmud lomar litzror. Oh, because it says rival wife in the pasuk. At litzror, that's what it means. Second wife. That teaches you also the second wife is exempt. So how do you get the tzara of the tzara? It could have said latzor. It says litzor. It has two ratios. Well, we learned from that formulation, since could have done a simpler formulation, that it means also the rival's wife as well. So that's how we learn the basic laws of our Mishnah, which is, again, it's only in a chot isha right now. In a minute, we're going to learn to all other cases, but that when there's an erva, you don't do Yibum other than the one exception, which is written explicitly in the Torah, which is go marry your brother's wife. Okay, there you can't avoid it. But anything that doesn't say explicitly do it, then we don't do it. So that's only if it's your wife's sister. Where do we get all the rest? Well, it's basically an obvious correlation. We're going to define what typifies achot isha. Ma achot isha miyuchedet shehi erva. Okay, number one, it's erva. Chayavim al zdona karet va'al shigata chatat. If you do it purposely, you sleep with this woman, you get karet. If it's accidental chatat, you have to bring a korban chatat, a sin offering. Ve asura liyabam, and she's forbidden to the yabam. So therefore, we're going to apply this to all the other cases that have the same criteria, and therefore they're all going to be forbidden as well. What about sarotehen? So it's going to be the same thing, basically. We're now going to add one more thing. She's erva. That's the punishment. Asura liyabam. She can't marry the yabam. V'tzarata asura. And we know already, we learned from the pasuk that her tzara is forbidden. So therefore, we're going to basically apply that to all the other cases. So that now explains what we learned in the beginning. At least we explained some part that I left unexplained today, which is, right, what is this case of achot isha, which they suggested in the beginning. Why wasn't that the first case? Because that's where all of these laws are derived from. Now we know where it's derived from. Now they say, where was I? Okay, Mikan Amul Chachamim. The Bright is going to continue now a little while longer. From here, the rabbi said, This is what we saw yesterday in the Mishnah. That's where the rabbis get it from. The Bright has the same language of the Mishnah as to why these women are exempt. Again, you see the order from Chalitza and from Yibum. Ad Sof HaOlam, right, forever. It doesn't matter, right, how many wives and how many this and all that. It's forever. Yachol. Now, the Braita continues, and again, we're going to learn something that I'm really going to just reference very minorly, and we're going to deal with it much later. Yachol shani marbe af shesh arayot chamorot me'elu sheyut tzarotehen asurot. The next Mishnah, I think it's the next one, is going to list 6 cases where this isn't the case, okay? Where she can't, there's no exemption here for the tzara, okay? And these are 6 things that are chamorot. They're not exactly chamorot. We'll see later. But you might have thought there at Tzarotehem will be asurot. Amalt, but now they're going to distinguish. Those are cases, by the way, where the brothers are forbidden to all of them in the same way, I think, or something, I forget. We'll get to those later, okay? So now they say, Amart, ma chodesh miyuchedet shiur v'chayvim al zdona karev al shegata chatat ve'efshar linaseh la'achim v'asura liyabam. Right, it has to be a case, right, this is what it is, sorry, now I remember. She, the one who's the erva, has to be a case, in all the cases we saw yesterday, she couldn't marry one brother, but she could marry the other brother, right? In these 6 cases, she can't marry the other brother either, okay? So in that case, since that's different, right, it has to be a case where she could potentially marry other brothers, right? Remember, let's say Bito, okay? She marries Shimon, that's already the brother, right? And then Shimon dies, Reuven is her father, she can't marry Reuven, but she can marry Levi, she can marry Yehuda, if there's other brothers, it's no problem. Those are the cases that she exempts the tzara. But if she can't marry any of the brothers, then it's different. Okay, that's a different kind of erva, and that's not what's mentioned in our Mishnah. So our Braita suggests maybe you would have thought those are like our Mishnah, and the answer is no, because it has to be, again, has to be like a chodisha and like all the cases in our Mishnah, where she could marry the brother, but she's forbidden to the Abam specifically, right, to just one of the brothers. Then v'tzarata asura, and then her tzara will be forbidden. But of course, so only ones that are just like that. Those 6 become an exception to the rule because since she can't marry the brother either, then right, she can't marry one brother, she can't marry 2 brothers, she can't marry any of the brothers. Therefore, okay, that's an exception. Okay, the whole law is just right, with one brother, not with if it's all the brothers. Now they say, Azhara shamanu onesh minayin. How do we know? So now that we learned from a chodisha, and that pasuk didn't mention any punishment whatsoever. So we understand it's forbidden, but how do you know that if, okay, let's say Shimon is married to, let's take the case of Bito always. Shimon is married to, I think it was Yael in the picture. Yael, Shimon dies. She falls to Reuven, her father. Now his second wife, Shula, marries Reuven. She gets karet and he gets karet. Okay, how do you know that? Because it says, end of the chapter of the Arayot, it says, anyone who does any of these things, and they missed the important part of the pasuk, which says, I don't remember exactly the form, but they get karet. Okay, so basically from there, you learn this general pasuk. Everyone who does anything from these verses, even things we learned out by drasha, is going to get karet. Okay. Last thing we're going to end with is this aseh and elot aseh. This was all premised on, and I specifically started so that you follow this. This was all, how do we get isha l'chotah, right? How do we know that you can't marry when it's erva? So, and then we said you can't marry when it's erva, and then not only can you not do yibum, but your tzara can't, was all based on this concept that aleha, right? Because of the aleha, that taught you, even when there's a mitzvah to do yibum, it doesn't override. So the premise of that is if we didn't have the word aleha, you would think that it overrides. Right? You think you'd be allowed to do yibum. So that's exactly what the Gemara is going to say. Tama, the katav rachmana aleha, it's because the pasuk said aleha, halav hachi. If it didn't say aleha, what would be the avi? What would be the basis of this drasha is without the word aleha, you would have said, havamina achot isha miyabemet, that you'd be allowed to marry her, do yibum with her, even if she's your erva, she's your wife's sister. My time. So what's the reason for what you would have thought had we not had the drasha? So the answer is exactly as I said before, comes a positive commandment, it overrides a negative commandment. Okay, that's a principle to which the Gemara is going to raise 2 questions on that. And that's where we're going to end today. And tomorrow is going to be really off the topic of Yibum for the most part and really into this topic, which is this mitzvah of aseh dachelot aseh, where does it come from, etc. So first the Gemara questions. Imor damrina nate aseh v'dachelot aseh, lo taseh greda. That's a regular lo taseh. If you have a positive commandment, it can override a regular negative commandment. But lo taseh sheish bo karet midache, but does it override something that's so severe that has karet associated with it? Then already, there's values to, lo taseh. There's regular and then there's severe. Who says the aseh can override something with karet? Vitu, and furthermore, lo taseh greda minal and didache. Where do we even get this concept that an aseh is doche lo taseh? And that's going to lead us to the famous drasha of tzitzit, and how tzitzit is shatnez, and we're going to start with that tomorrow. And like I said, we'll get a little bit off the topic of Yevamot for a little while. It's kind of, we got you into it, but now we give you a little bit of a break, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Have a great day.